computer. Okay, it's recording right now. Oy, oy, oy. I'm still learning with the Zoom stuff. Okay, so the meeting is being recorded. I'm glad I noticed that, and it will be available in a few days. I'll send out a link for everybody. It'll be on our YouTube channel. Okay, take it away, Mary.
Hi, everybody. Mary Birdsong, Program Chair for Presque Isle Audubon, and I'm here tonight to present someone that is going to do our program for the evening, Andrew Sipple. Before we get a little started, if the way the question and answers work at the end is that if you could type your question in the chat box, you can, I will then ask the questions of Andrew. If you are unfamiliar with if you look at the bottom of your screen, if you have not full screened it, there is a choice of a chat box, and you can click on that and it'll open up on the right hand side, and you can type your message down at the bottom right, and then I will ask the questions of Andrew. This way we don't have a lot of different voices going on all at the same time. And if you have questions about that, ask, I suppose, but you could put them in the chat box, which sounds wrong. Anyways, the other thing before I get started in introducing Andrew is next month's program is the cartoonist Dave Blazek, who's an Erie native, and he's going to join us and talk about making wings wild. Is essentially a lot of his cartoons have birds in them, and he's going to highlight those, but also talk a little bit about his life as a cartoonist. So it's something completely different from what we usually do. I thought it would be a lot of fun. And there's more information about that on our Facebook page and in our newsletter, which you can find on our website, presqueisleaudubon.org. Tonight, Andrew Sipple is going to be talking about plants and the interrelationship between plants and birds at Presque Isle State Park. And Andrew has been enamored with the natural wonders of Presque Isle throughout his life. Currently, he is the AmeriCorps Vista at the Feeding Minds STEM program at Gannon University, which works with middle school children. And in addition to exploring the peninsula and searching for rare plants, he is an avid fan of classical music. Yay. And his interests include gardening, environmental issues, and social justice. Andrew, take it away.
Good evening, everyone. I'm so glad to see a lot of people have joined me tonight. I hope that you all will enjoy this presentation. I have a lot of really cool information that I'm excited to share with all of you. And so we're going to be talking about the flora of Presque Isle, and through this presentation you'll get a tour of some of the different plant communities of the park, what kinds of plants you would find in each community, and then I'm going to be making some connections to the bird life in the park, and specifically plants that provide food, shelter, nesting materials for some of the park's unique bird species. Please note that I'm happy to take questions. Just put them in the chat box, and at the very end, just to remind you all, I'll take the questions at the end. All of the pictures in this presentation are photos that I've taken over the last decade at Presque Isle State Park. So I hope that you enjoy as we move through the photos. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and start the screen share. So give me one moment. Okay. There we go. Okay, Sue, can you see my screen?
Yes, it looks beautiful, just like this morning.
All right, fantastic. So as I said, we're going to talk about the natural communities and plants of the park with emphasis on their value for the wild birds. Right here, you can see a picture out on Gull Point. Now, at any time, if you guys are interested in checking out my website, it's right here. It's pbase.com/Andrew_Sipple, and you'll find hundreds of pictures of different plants I've found over the years. I'm up to 880 species of plants on my life list so far. So I enjoy getting out and just enjoying all the different biodiversity of the plant world. You also see my email here. So if you have any questions at any point, feel free to email me and I will answer them. All right, so here we are, our beloved Presque Isle State Park here. Here's our park map, and you can see all the different trails and the beaches and the different natural features, the bays and the ponds. Now, the next image, I have it set up so it lines up exactly, and it is a satellite image of the area. And here you can see the city of Erie, the State Street Pier. You can see the neck of the peninsula. And then if you look out past the bay, you'll see the different forested sand ridges alternating with the ponds and the lagoons. And you can also see Gull Point out here, which this looks different now than it did in 2014. It's constantly changing out there. So getting a little closer here to bring in the geology of the park and the geological history, essentially what's happened over thousands of years is an amazing continual process of creation and destruction as beaches are deposited and eroded from the force of the lake. And you can actually see old shorelines here. At one point, this would have been the dune line and the beach of the park. If you actually stand along this area of the park or even along the sidewalk trail, that pond used to be the shore, the beach. But over time, new sandbars formed, new dunes formed. We're going to talk about how the dunes formed with the grasses over time. And that process is very dynamic and continuing out here at Gull Point. A lot of erosion is happening here east of the breakwaters, and new deposition is happening here. So getting to the different plant communities, the first plant community we're going to tour are the dunes and the beaches, which you will find nothing like this anywhere else in the state of Pennsylvania. It really is truly one of our greatest treasures of our area. I think we take for granted sometimes. We forget like how lucky we are to have this in our community. And as I mentioned, dynamic is really the key word here. Everything is constantly changing, shifting, sand blowing, waves knocking dunes apart, and the lake levels constantly changing also have an effect on this. But we're going to talk about our dune builders, which are the plants that have the special ability to grow upward through the sand as it accumulates, and they have the ability to deal with the heat and the dry conditions of the summer. So here's a picture of Sawmill Beach, one of my favorite places in the park. It doesn't look like this anymore, though, sadly, due to the high lake levels washing up against these dunes. But one day, the lake levels will hopefully go down again, and they will slowly recover. So the first plant I want to talk about is sea rocket. This is a plant you'll find nowhere else in Pennsylvania, but along the Lake Erie coast. And the place you would find it would be like right here on the sparsely vegetated sand area just below the dunes. And it has the ability to grow in very hot and dry conditions. Next to it, you'll find a Seaside Spurge, another delicate plant that grows sideways along the ground in a prostrate fashion. Nowhere else in Pennsylvania will you find this one either. And then this one, a lot of people, when you say pigweed, they think, oh, it's a terrible agricultural weed. But we have an interesting type of pigweed on Presque Isle that takes on a really beautiful look in the fall when it turns bright pink. And I did a little research on this, and I found that, hold on one second. I found that there's a good chance that game birds and songbirds eat the small seeds of these plants as they do with other pigweeds and amaranths. And if they pass through their digestive systems, which is what I read, then they can help to disperse the seeds. This source here, Illinois Wildflowers, is one of the best online sources you'll find if you want to get information about all the different species. We don't really have a resource like this in Pennsylvania. And then the dune grasses. I can't overstate enough how important the grasses are. Countless millions of people walk along the beaches in the summer and probably don't even think about how important these are. These really are like the keystone species of the dunes. As sand blows and accumulates, they can grow as they're buried upward. Now the beech grass, that's the number one most important one. And I'm just going to back up here a second. That is pretty much, this is all beech grass here. Again, nowhere else in Pennsylvania will you find that plant. But there's some other ones as well. Switchgrass, much taller. Indian grass, probably the most beautiful. Sandbur is probably the most despised, although I actually love it. And then of course, purple sandgrass and little blue stem, which are also very rare. So here's just a look at some of the biodiversity grasses we have in their inflorescences, that is their flowering structures. We got beech grass, switchgrass, Indian grass, which I think is the most elegant of all. And this one, most people do not like it. I don't know if I've ever met anybody else who likes it besides me, because if you find it, you often find it with your foot, and if you're walking barefoot on the beach, it's not a fun experience. It's pretty sharp. Nonetheless, I like it because it's beautiful and it's a very uncommon species. The purple sandgrass, one of our rarest plants, and the little blue stem. All of these grasses form a unique assemblage of plants that form the basis of the dune ecosystem. And again, like I said, stabilizing the beaches, trapping sand, and providing habitat and cover and nesting materials for shorebirds, which feed on the invertebrates on the beach. And I did find this interesting fact from the Illinois Wildflowers website. Nearly a third of field sparrow nests in Illinois were supported by Indian grass. Indian grass is also a prairie species. If you head farther west, you'll find it in the tallgrass region as well. So a very, very, very important grass species on the park. Now we have some legumes too, the wonderful, brilliant purple beach pea and the trailing wild bean, which is really a neat sight. You'll see these mixed in with the grasses, blooming throughout the summer. And I did find that the trailing wild bean, the seeds are consumed by some birds, including the wild turkey, bobwhite, and mourning dove. This one, it's not a legume, but it's another really cool wildflower with an interesting smell. If you rub your hands on it and smell, it's kind of stinky. It's called clammy weed. It's very sticky, and I don't really see it anywhere else but along Lake Erie. And this one is extremely rare, beech wormwood. And this is very abundant near Beach 9. And then there is, sorry about that, there is the evening primrose as well. There's actually a rare species, but I don't know how to, I honestly do not know how to tell it apart from the common one. It's very similar looking, but there is a rare one that grows on the beaches of Presque Isle. And I did find American goldfinches like the seeds that come in the little pods from the evening primrose. And by the way, evening primrose opens at night, hence the name. A very common species. You'll find at the edge of any field or any roadside, a common milkweed, but it's also a member of the dune ecosystem. You'll find it mixed in with the grasses and the legumes. And in the late summer, you'll often find a lot of monarchs in the area. And then I did a little research here. The Cornell Lab of Ornithology is another excellent website if you want to learn about birds in their life cycle. The American goldfinch, I did not know this until recently. It's one of the latest birds to nest. They nest very, very late. And they like having silky fibers and seeds available that come from milkweed and thistle. Most birds do their nesting, in the May, June, July period, but this bird later in the summer. This is another one of my real favorites, the starry false Solomon seal, which you'll see generally on the backside of dunes, the older side of dunes, where ecological succession is starting to happen a little bit. And there are some other plants in this genus on the park. Canada Mayflower we'll see in a little bit, but there are woodland birds that like to eat the berries of plants in the Manthamum genus. Thrushes, veeries, and some other birds as well. One of our rarest species is silverweed. And I got a nice background in this picture, but the background is not exactly a good thing. That is the Phragmites or common reed, which is very invasive on the park. So while it makes a nice background here, that is a continual challenge for maintaining plant biodiversity and the health of the community of birds as well at the park. Now, if you like to smell plants and see what different kind of fragrances there are, this one's one of the most interesting ones. The seeds crushed up in your hand, they smell like burnt tar. I've never found a plant quite like it, but it's called indigo bush. And I don't think I've ever found a plant that has that deep of a color of purple in the flowers either. You'll see this along the dunes, and this is a woody plant. So now we're kind of moving toward the woody plants. Hop tree, another very endangered plant. This is the host plant for the giant swallowtail. So it's very important. And you'll see here are the little papery fruits that you'll find late in the summer. Now, if you look at the leaves, you'll think, oh, that looks like poison ivy. A lot of people think it looks like poison ivy, and it certainly does. But once you realize it's a tree, then you'll be like, oh, okay. But don't let your guard down, because poison ivy does grow right next to this plant on the beach dunes. So to eat or not to eat, I found one site that mentions birds eating the papery fruits, but I found another site that said most birds avoid them. So I would be curious to learn a little bit more about it. One cool thing about this plant is that it's in the citrus family, and it's actually a rather acidic, bitter plant. And of course, the keystone species of the whole peninsula, the eastern cottonwood. And now I'm a total plant nerd. I'm definitely not your typical person. I actually, to get this picture, it was like the most perfect setup I could ever find for cottonwood. But I had to walk out into water with waders to take this picture. And my good friend Tim, he has a pretty funny picture of me out in the water taking a picture of it. But it's one of my favorite pictures. You'll find these catkins in the spring. And yes, it really is the iconic tree of the peninsula. The spring buds and catkins feed the purple finch. There's many insects in the tree that are associated with it that feed the bird. And of course, habitat-wise, and on the neck of the peninsula, you'll find really large cottonwoods that are excellent for pileated woodpeckers. Out toward Gull Point, the smaller ones make great cover and habitat for the yellow warblers. And the wild grape. As the dunes mature through the process of ecological succession, you'll start to see more vines tangling, poison ivy and grapes. And there are a number of grape species on the peninsula that are difficult to tell from each other, but they are relished by birds like the cedar waxwing, the catbird, the cardinal, and older vines. Those flaky strips of bark that you'll find on woodland vines of grapes are very popular as nesting material, including for the hooded warbler and the veery, as well as the towhee. And the kingbird, it is the preferred nesting habitat according to the Illinois Wildflowers website. Now this one, most people, if I say poison ivy, most people are like, I don't like that plant. Even plant enthusiasts aren't usually excited about finding poison ivy. But me being the total plant nerd I am, I was pretty excited this past summer because I found a different species of poison ivy that's actually rare in Pennsylvania. It's actually a state-listed species, and it's the western species. Unlike the common eastern one, which is they form tangles of vines up into the trees, the western poison ivy is more upright, and it grows along the beach dunes. So one reason not to wander into the dunes is because you don't want to disturb the plants and the birds there, but another reason is you might end up bumping into the poison ivy as well. But this rare variety doesn't really occur very much elsewise in Pennsylvania. And these berries, even the berries, can give you a rash. But what? Poison ivy is a good thing? Actually, it is. Birds consume them and they love them. Yellow-rumped warblers, robins, bluebirds. And there are many caterpillar species that this plant hosts that are a really important food source for insect-eating birds. I cited a really cool nature blog here called Ohio Birds and Biodiversity. If you like nature blogs, I recommend you check this one out. It's Jim McCormick's blog, and he has a lot of really cool information. Now we move away from the beaches and the dunes, we move into the sand plains. And there are two different types. We have the wet and the dry. I'm going to start with the dry. And this is one of my favorite spots in the park where the lupines can be seen in profusion out in one of the dry sand plains. You can see here oaks, young choke cherries, bayberry bushes, lupines are some of the predominant species, as well as some grasses mixed in as well. And then there's the moist sand plain. You can see here we have the rose pink or rose gentian and boneset. And there's some of our cottonwood trees. So now the dry sand plain species overlap a little bit with the dunes. You'll see these on the dunes as well, on the dry sandy dunes. Lyre-leaf rockcress, that's probably the most glorious spring wildflower in the park. It's really abundant. All the dunes just sparkle with white when it starts blooming in April. And one of our most beloved and most rare plants, the hairy puccoon, which can be found on dry sand plains as well. And there it is, the wild lupine. And I've actually found a couple different variants on the park. This is the typical color, but you can also find pale colored flowers as well. And I did a little research on this, and I actually did learn that lupines are a nectar plant, and they can be attractive to hummingbirds. And of course, one of my absolute favorites, I really only know of 2 individual plants on the park. So I cannot share the location of them, but this is the prickly pear cactus. And this is the one that has the red center. There are other ones that are all yellow. This is one of my favorite plants in the park. And most people were like, what? There's a cactus in Pennsylvania? But where it grows makes total sense because it's dry, hot sand. And now one of the most important plants for the birds is the bayberry. They produce these gray waxy berries in the fall. And I can't overstate enough how important this is for the avian life and diversity of the park. This plant is very rare in Pennsylvania. It's pretty much absent elsewhere in our area. You might find it in like a fen here or there, and there might be a few plants, but that's really about it. Presque Isle, however, has just thousands of these shrubs. There's just tons of them. And so that's one of the biggest draws of the park, especially in the fall and the winter for birds. Yellow-rumped warblers are also called myrtle warblers, and that's because this plant is a member of the myrtle family. It is one of their absolutely preferred food sources. Also tree swallows, gray catbirds, eastern bluebirds, red-bellied woodpeckers, and there's a profusion of these little gray waxy fruits in the fall and into the winter. But there's some other birds too that like it as well. Turkeys, flickers, chickadees, towhees, and red-winged blackbirds like the cover of the bushes for nesting. You'll find this on the edge of some of the sand plains, like on the Dead Pond Trail. Shadbush you also find in the sandy thickets of the park. This is important because this is the first berry to mature in the season. And it's also called Juneberry, which it's a good name for it because the fruits are produced in June. And a lot of birds are still nesting, so it's very convenient. And of course, the park has many goldenrods. Probably my favorite is the gray goldenrod, which is a very short, delicate, petite species that you can find en masse in the sand plains. And goldenrods in general produce seeds that are very important, especially for the American goldfinch. Another rarity, the hairy pinweed, which is another state-listed species that grows in sand barrens. Also the round-headed bush clover, which I've not seen anywhere else but here at Presque Isle. Now we're going to move from the dry sand plains to the moist and the wet sand plains. And this is a very dynamic habitat. It's actually the rarest habitat. There's nowhere else in Pennsylvania that you'll find this. Whereas like the sparsely vegetated beaches, you can find some of those east and west of Erie. You will not find moist sand plains anywhere in Pennsylvania but on Presque Isle. And it's so dynamic because the lake levels can periodically flood them out, or they can become drier depending on the cycle of the lake. So these ecosystems are particularly prominent out of Gull Point, and they can form along the edge of some ponds where it's relatively flat and the water table's near the surface. This plant, there is no other place in Pennsylvania. Excuse me, I take that back. There's only one other place in Pennsylvania for this plant. I looked for it and I couldn't find it there. So, but it's very abundant on Presque Isle. The smooth seed box, it's a fitting name for it because it literally produces a box of seeds. And then one of the park's orchids, the tubercled orchid, not the most charismatic of orchids, but most fascinating are its little protuberances or tubercles, which aid in pollination. One of my favorite plants, the rose pink, which grows in these moist sand plains. The aquatic plant mermaid weed, which is related to water milfoil. And I've never seen this anywhere else but Presque Isle. It's called the false daisy, and it's not even in most field guides. And then I think this might be the last one for the moist sand plains. This is Canada milkvetch. I only know of one place in the peninsula where I found it, and that area has been completely flooded out in the last few years. So I don't even know if I could relocate this plant again. But I did learn that it's another legume that produces nectar. It's very imperiled and very rare. And I found one of my favorite wildflower websites, the Ladybird Johnson Wildflower Center, does have information documenting that hummingbirds are known to feed on the nectar. We've explored are incredibly varied and dynamic, so is it true also for the forests. We have the eastern cottonwood forest, we have the dry oak ridge, we have the red maple swamps, and we have the pine plantations. And these different forests, they occur in different areas based on how wet it is and how far succession has taken the ecosystem. So here's a real common site, the cottonwood forest, prominent on the neck of the peninsula. You can see here we got a real tangle of non-native bittersweet vines. Sorry, my mind stopped for a second there. Bittersweet vines, which are a real challenge for the park because they're very invasive. And then, of course, a totally different kind of forest on the ancient dunes that are hundreds and hundreds of years old. Oak trees have taken hold. You can see the young oaks as well as their older, the parents of those younger oak trees. And you can see there's some bayberry in these zones as well. So there's the red oak. And while it's a very common species in Pennsylvania, I can't overstate how it's really an important one for birds. Over 500 species of caterpillars feed on this tree. There's no other tree that produces as many caterpillars as this tree. So it's very important for insect eating birds. And believe it or not, woodpeckers, blue jays, they love acorns. So it's really important mast that these trees produce of nuts for winter birds. And of course, excellent for all kinds of nesting, cavity nesters, tree branch nesters. So you'll see that this is like the climax species on the old dunes that long ago were covered with those grasses. And then you'll find Canada Mayflower, carpets of these. Now, one thing I'll note, Presque Isle does have kind of a paucity of spring ephemeral wildflowers. You're not going to find spring beauties and skunk cabbage and marsh marigold, a lot of things you see, trout lilies, things you would see in your streamside woods. So there's not as much spring woodland wildflower stuff, but this one in particular is very abundant though in the park. And here's another one too, the Canada hawkweed. I've seen this once in the park. And the enchanter's nightshade, which the burrs that form can get caught in the fur and the feathers of mammals and birds, and that's how they're distributed. The lovely mayapple, that's one of the few spring wildflowers that does grow in the park, which is edible, by the way, but only when it's fully ripe. And now moving away from the oak forests, I want to talk about the pine forests. Now, keep in mind, most of the pines in the park are not the native white pine. There are some native white pines mixed in, but most of them are non-native Scotch pines that were planted, I think I want to say back in the 50s. But nonetheless, they still serve a similar ecological role. Pines are very popular in terms of the seeds or the pine nuts. They're food for the yellow-bellied sapsucker, the nuthatches, black-capped chickadee, pine warbler, pine siskin crossbill, evening grosbeak. If you talk to anybody from the Audubon Society, they'll tell you how the pines area and the pine tree trail are an excellent area to find certain bird species. And of course, nesting and roosting sites for hawks and owls, kinglets. I could go on and on. The pines are definitely a really important part of the peninsula. Kind of in a similar way to these non-native pines, there are also non-native white birches on the park too. You'll find not too far from the pines. And that's another case where it's a non-native species that's kind of taken over, but it does serve a role for some birds. Red poles in particular love the catkins of the non-native birches. So it's one of those interesting cases where we've kind of messed up the ecosystem a little bit with a non-native plant, but there happen to be some side benefits of it. And underneath these pines, you'll find the lovely starflower in the month of May. And growth sandwort. That is one spring wildflower you won't find hardly anywhere else. And it's quite abundant on the park. This is one of the rarest. I spent years trying to find this plant because the flower opens and withers in one day. You have to be there the right day to get it. And after probably like 5 years of looking for it, I finally got it. And it's very rare. And then in some of the more like thicket woodlands of the park, you'll find an abundance of sassafras, which the berries are quite popular. In fact, it's even a preferred food source for a number of birds, including the red-eyed vireo and the pileated woodpecker, among others. This is a plant you'll find very abundant in the park. And most people aren't happy to find a ton of it because It's hard to get through it, and it's thorny. The green briars, as they're called, or the cat briars. However, they do provide very important habitat for birds because there's a sense of cover and safety for birds and small mammals. And the berries are indeed relished by the birds. Now, I mentioned that non-native bittersweet a little while ago, but we do have a native bittersweet that is being crowded out by the oriental one. But I have seen this rare native one, the rare Native American bittersweet. And you can tell this from the other one because the berries are in like a beautiful terminal clump like this. They're not scattered along the edge. And this plant is also very valuable for wildlife. Many songbirds eat the seed buds. Wild turkey and ruffed grouse also feast on this plant. And of course, asters. There's actually many different kinds of asters in the park. Some grow in the sand barrens, some grow in sunny openings in the woods, some grow along the roadside, but all of them produce seeds that are great for seed-eating birds like the goldfinch, the cardinal, nuthatches, sparrows, and the chickadee. And of course, if you've taken a drive through Presque Isle in August or September, you're often just totally blown away by the profusion of sunflowers along the road. Now, sunflowers are very difficult to identify. That's one area that I found a challenge. There's many different kinds, but there's no overstating that it is one of the most valuable plants. As you know, if you have a bird feeder, it is one of the premier plants. And because it's so abundant on the park, it is able to offer a lot to the different birds. Not just all the birds listed at the bottom of the slide here for seeds, but also for nesting materials. The stems are great for nesting materials. And there is also nectar, which is appealing to hummingbirds as well. You'll also find this in the wooded thickets of the park, the Virginia creeper or woodbine, which is another very important species. It's actually a bird food source for flycatchers, birds, yellow-rumped warblers, among others. Oh, and I should add, a lot of people, when they see Virginia creeper, they think that it's poison ivy, but Virginia creeper has 5 leaflets. Poison ivy has 3. And now we're going to move into a different zone. This is the swamp forest. At the base of the old dunes that are now covered with dry oak forest, you'll find swampy low forest dominated by red maples. Basically, this zone exists between the dry oak ridges and the marshes. This is like a transitional zone. And in here, you'll find a red maple, which is preferred by woodpeckers for drilling because of the soft bark. It's easy to drill through it in pursuit of insects. And you'll also find mixed in here black gum as well, which produces berries that are preferred by ducks. They look like this. Also cedar waxwings and eastern kingbirds like these as well. Unfortunately, this zone of the park, the best place to see this zone would be like near the end of Peninsula Drive before you get to Duck Pond and the part where the road splits. You see the like low swampy area. But when I say unfortunately, the reason is high lake levels have been so extreme that a lot of trees have actually died in this area. You can go driving along this area in mid-August and there's just dead trees. They've been totally flooded out there. So these high water levels have really changed things. All right, so it kind of makes sense to transition from like the swampy forests into just the wetlands in general. And you'll see here, I've mapped out some different kinds. But they all form, or most of them form from depressions where water's trapped between sandbars and sand ridges. And again, the type of vegetation you find will vary depending on where the water level is. We have the open marshes, like the lagoons, the shrub swamps, the wooded swamps, like where the red maples are, as I just mentioned, and also the wet meadows. So here's a view of the lagoons and the open marsh ecosystem. And here is an example of a shrub swamp along Cranberry Pond, dominated by wild roses, perhaps some dogwoods in there as well, maybe some chokeberries, and some swamp loosestrife. These are the rose hips right here. And now what we're going to do as we move through, this is our last section. The wetlands is our last section. As we move through, I'm going to basically start us in the middle of the deep water where the underwater plants are, and I'm going to kind of move us away from the deep water toward the red maple swamp. So the plants are going to progress from submerged to floating to emergent to shrubs and then into trees. So there's kind of an order to it here. Now, the aquatic plants in general are very important for waterfowl, shorebirds. The camouflage and cover they provide is critical for their survival. The reeds are really important for nesting material and shelter. And a lot of these plants have very, very nutrient rich, either seeds or fruits or tubers. And of course, there's a whole food web of invertebrates and fish in these areas that help to feed a lot of different birds. Terns that like the fish, many birds that eat the invertebrates and the insects. So having good water quality and good diversity in the aquatic vegetation, the whole ecosystem is built upon that. And one more thing before I move on to pondweeds, a problem that has occurred at Presque Isle, many of you already know, over the last decade or so has been the invasion of the non-native Phragmites reed grass. And there are some really heroic efforts going on now with local volunteers in the park at trying to knock back the invasive grasses so that healthy foundation of the wetland ecosystem can thrive once more. One of the best places to see that is between Beach 10 and Beach 11. 5 years or so ago, it was just a total jungle of reed grass. Now you can see open water again, and you can even find things like great white egrets. They actually can get in there again now that it's not so clogged with the invasive Phragmites grasses. All right, so starting with the deep water, we have pondweeds, and there are actually at least 3 different species in the park that are rare and state listed, and they sometimes drive botanists nuts. There's many different kinds. You have to look at the shape of the leaf, whether it has floating leaves, where the flower cluster is. They're a really interesting group of plants, but the birds find them even more interesting than we do because they are really important in terms of food value. Some birds eat the entire thing, some eat certain parts. And some of the different species, the rare ones in particular, be indicators of good water quality or not so good water quality. This little one, the wild celery, you can find it along the shore of the bay, some of the different inlets of the park, and in the deep water of the lagoons. If you're ever kayaking and you look down, it looks like there's these weird coils or spirals of stems. You're probably looking at wild celery. It's neat looking below the surface. And it is absolutely beloved by canvasback ducks. In fact, it is their very favorite. They'll even go out of their way to get to this plant. It features foliage. It has tubers that are really rich in energy and nutrients. It has fruits. It really truly is a superior food source. Plovers, rails, sandpipers, snipes, all really like this plant. Now, this source I have mentioned here, Through the Looking Glass, this is one of my favorite field guides. I actually found a field guide to aquatic plants. It's user-friendly, and it's called Through the Looking Glass, a field guide to aquatic plants. So if you want to learn about plants that grow in water, it's really, really detailed, but not too technical for the layperson. And I'll have all my references listed at the end. The beautiful fragrant water lily, which is difficult to get a picture of because it's in such deep water, and the yellow pond lily or the spatterdock. This one produces fruits that are beloved by the ring-necked duck, the golden eye, lesser scaup, the black duck, wood duck, and Virginia rail. And there's also the delightful smartweed. If you take a lagoon tour around Labor Day, the lagoons they're just beautiful with pink blankets of this stuff, real late in the season. Mixed in with that, you'll find Pickerel Weed, and that one is also really important for waterfowl in terms of providing food. Wood ducks and black ducks feed on this plant. The Burr reed, that is actually one of the more characteristic species of Great Lakes marshes. And this too is an important food plant for waterfowl and shorebirds, and even tundra swans as well like to eat the fruits. And now this is what we call a bird superfood, or I guess I should say a duck superfood, because ducks love this, the arrowhead. The leaves are shaped like an arrowhead, that's why it's called that. I know you can't see in the picture, but this is like, people say kale is a superfood for humans. Well, this is a superfood for birds. Ducks, this is very important for them during migration. The tubers are very, very high in energy. The seeds are also very good for the waterfowl and the shorebirds and the marsh birds. I also add that we can also eat the tubers of this plant. It's sometimes called duck potato because it's very much like a potato that's preferred for ducks. And of course, along with dozens of sedges on the park, we find this one of my favorite sedges, the long-haired sedge. The delightful swamp rose mallow. If you're lucky, you might even see a plant with a deep pink center. I didn't find a lot of information on bird values of this plant. I would have to delve a little more deeply on that. But some other plants you'll find, we're kind of moving away from the deep water toward the shallower water now. These are the emergent plants that they emerge out of the surface. Yellow loosestrife, tufted loosestrife. And these are very important, the bulrushes. These are a type of sedge, even though it says bulrush, it really should be called a bull sedge because they're actually sedges. And they are very important for habitat. And there's many different kinds too. They really vary in the structure of the inflorescence. These plants are important for marsh wrens. That's a very rare bird, by the way. And they like to nest 2 to 5 feet above the ground in these plants. And many birds like these plants for their stems, which are popular for nesting materials. This is another plant that stands to benefit from the removal of the invasive Phragmites. You also find blue vervain along the marsh edges as we slowly start moving into the shallower and shallower water and even onto land, saturated land. Wide-leaved ladies' tresses, which is one of our park's orchids, which is also a state-listed species. The marsh pea, another state-listed endangered species. And the wild rice, which grows in shallow water near the edges, also very valuable for waterfowl. Red-winged blackbirds, the Sora rail. It's very important during migration. The seed can even account for up to 25% of the late season diet of wood ducks. This is, again, another plant that tends to benefit from the removal of the Phragmites. Plant will be able to grow and cover more area. Another state-listed species, the southern blue flag. This is not the typical blue flag iris. If you're a wildflower lover and you see blue flag iris, this is a little different than the typical one. The colors are different, and it's pretty rare. Another state-listed species, the small beggar's ticks. There are many kinds of beggar's ticks, but they all provide food for birds. Most people don't like the seeds because they stick to clothing, but bobwhite, swamp sparrow, and purple finch will consume the seeds. Okay, and now we're on the home stretch here. We're moving into that shrub swamp where now it's this woody plants. And this is one of the most important zones for birds because there's so many berry producing shrubs. So we have buttonbush, which looks like this in the fall. We have winterberry, which is actually a holly. It's a deciduous holly, it loses its leaves, but you'll recognize it in the winter. The brilliant red berries stay on into the winter. They provide a source of emergency food for many birds. And the bushes are also excellent habitat for many breeding birds. These fruits do indeed persist well into the fall and even into the winter. The high bush cranberry, another one of the cool plants in the park. There are actually 2 varieties, a non-native one and a native one. Telling them apart is actually, you have to get like a hand lens and look at the stalk of the leaf. It's very specific. But either one, they both produce fruits that are relished by birds. They last late into the season. The native one is threatened by an invasive insect called the viburnum leaf beetle. So we'll see how things happen over time if this plant really declines. Swamp loosestrife, another wetland shrub. If you got your waders on and you're exploring a marsh, you might not like this plant because the stems, they kind of arch and root, and they can trip you if you're walking through the muck. But the flowers are beautiful, and the berries are relished by many ducks, at least 5 different species of duck here, like the seeds inside the fruits. High bush blueberry. This is the same blueberry that we grow in our gardens. All of our cultivars are actually they were developed from this species. And there's at least 30 species of birds that eat these, and these are very abundant in the park. However, I would caution everyone, please do not pick the berries on the park, since we can find them so abundantly at farm markets and in our gardens in the summer. We don't want to have a negative impact on the park. We want to save those berries for the birds, like the towhee, the bluebird, and the robin. Swamp roses grow mixed in with these as well. And their rose hips are, it's one of the richest sources of vitamin C that you can ever find. You can actually get rose hip tea, you can get rose hip supplements. They're very rich in vitamin C, and birds love them, especially cedar waxwings. And then the taller bushes are also good nesting habitat. The thorns help to protect the birds. And this is actually the last plant. We have reached the end. This is willow. There are many species of willows. That is an area I've probably ventured into the least. Even with my 880 species I've identified, I've never really differentiated at least two willows. They're very tough to tell apart. There's so many different kinds. I know that there's one in the park that is endangered called the blue-leaved willow, but I don't know if I would be able to tell you how to tell it apart from others. Nonetheless, all of them are absolutely beautiful when the catkins come out in spring. And they're also, there's something called dioecious, which means that the plants are two sexes entirely on two different plants. So there'll be a male plant and there'll be a female plant. And the catkins actually look different depending on whether it's a female or male plant. And white-crowned sparrows and numerous ducks, like the catkins. Red poles feast on the buds, and it's excellent cover for American goldfinches. So I'm actually kind of amazed I got through that, because that was like 160 slides, but I really appreciate everyone that had the opportunity to join me tonight and get a tour of the different habitats and species of the park. I hope that you enjoyed learning about the different wildflowers, the unique groupings of them in different communities, as well as their value for the birds. I'll just mention a few references here. If you want to learn more, if you want to delve in a little more deeply, there's some really cool websites here. I can't state enough how awesome the Cornell Lab of Ornithology is. They have wonderful recordings of birds, excellent pictures. Dynamic Dunes, that is the website for the Natural History Museum at Presque Isle. I recommend you check it out. And there's several other ones here too. I would note, if you're a real nature geek, the Erie County Natural Heritage Inventory, you could spend days pouring through that and looking at all the different rare species. It's so fun to read. And as I mentioned earlier, Illinois Wildflower is one of the best websites. We just don't really have a Pennsylvania wildflower website, anything like this. Ohio Birds and Biodiversity, that's that Jim McCormick blog I mentioned. And of course, we got the Audubon Society on here. This is the field guide I mentioned to aquatic plants. It took me years to find a good enough book on aquatic plants. And then the USDA Plants Database, one other one I'll point out, excellent source of information. So that brings us to the end of the presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. And I would like to thank everyone again for coming here to learn this evening. I hope that if you go out to the peninsula again, maybe you'll see things in a little new light. You'll notice some of the subtle details, some of the different things. Maybe you'll head to the beach next summer and be like, oh yeah, there's that beach pea he was talking about. Or if you're canoeing, maybe you'll find the burr reed that's important for the different ducks and animals. So I hope that everyone enjoyed learning all this stuff. And if you wish to be done, you are welcome to exit after this. But if you'd like to stay on, we're going to have some questions, some Q&A, and some discussion. I'd be happy to answer questions. And also, if anybody wants to share some of their knowledge, particularly some of the more bird savvy people in the group, if you want to share your knowledge and how it relates to some of the stuff I talked about, I would love to look here and have a good discussion. So, and as I understand, Mary Birdsong is going to moderate the chat and look at the questions and provide send the questions to me so I can provide answers. So I'm looking forward to finding out what you guys would like to learn. So thanks again, and I'm going to turn it over to Mary now.
Hi, everyone. I assume you can hear me. I've turned everything off or on. I'm going to take these questions in the order that they came in. Besides all the great, wonderful presentations, Andrew, thank you very much. Georgia Feld, I can't remember Georgia. She wanted to know if you collected any of that Western poison ivy for the herbarium or the Natural History Museum. And if you did, how did you do it?
That is a great question. And Mark Letheby, I work with Mark Letheby, and I do some collecting for him. And that is a plant that I would like to collect. And I will say I still haven't gotten brave enough to do that yet. Unfortunately, we don't have it in our herbarium. But this next summer, I'm really serious about getting it this next summer, getting some gloves and just like being I have the permit to collect for the park because I work with the Natural History Museum, and just being very careful to find a way to extract it without getting the rash. So answer is no, I've not done it yet, but it will be a little adventure this summer when I go to do it.
Well, yeah, they freeze dry their samples, don't they? Or do they press them?
Both. Well, so basically first the things have to be frozen. That's the policy. They can't go into the room where the plants are stored until it's been in a freezer for at least 24 hours.
Okay.
And then from there, actually, let me back up. They're going to be dried and pressed first, and then they're going to be frozen. And then after they're frozen, we take them down to the herbarium, and then they're mounted on the board that they'll stay on. And then we have like a little sheet with all the information that we glue to it.
Okay. Someone wanted tips for photography or lens selection for photographing these plants that you've taken.
Yeah, so I actually use a very old camera. I'm actually not the most like high tech, up to date photographer. I use an Olympus camera, and my goodness, I can't off the top of my memory remember the exact kind, but it's like a DSLR digital camera. Olympus, I think it came out like back in like 2009, or like it's like 10 years old roughly. But what is nice about it is the size of the sensor is such that I can get a lot in focus. I do a lot of photography and exploring with my friend Tim Lyons. He's the husband of Sue, the president of the Audubon Society. He's an incredibly talented photographer. And he's mentioned to me that one of the challenges, if I were to use a lot of the newer cameras that have come out, I would get a more blurred background, which is nice, but I wouldn't be able to get as much of the flower in focus. So depending on the size of the sensor you get, it's going to change the very look of the style of photography you have. Some people like that fully blurred background with just a little bit of the flower in focus, like a portrait. And then, some other folks, myself, I really like, I actually don't mind having some background details in there. I just want to get as much in focus as I can. So short answer is I like the Olympus camera, but it's pretty old, and I don't know what I'm going to do when it stops working.
Well, I actually have macro filters for my iPhone. You can buy them, and that does blur out backgrounds. Mm-hmm. But I've taken some incredibly great macro shots of flowers with that add-on lens.
Do you attach it to the iPhone? It's like a
yeah. It's a little tiny lens that you can you have to have a little magnetic ring that goes around the lens, and then the lens actually just connects to that magnet strip that you put around your lens.
Wow, that's awesome. I did not know about that.
It's worth looking into, especially for field work, because then you don't have the extra burden of carrying a camera with you.
Right. Yeah, more compact.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Okay. Next question. Is native bittersweet a vine, or is it a non-vine?
It is a vine. It's a woody vine, kind of like tangles up along trees. And the way to tell it apart from the oriental one is called Celastris orbiculatus. And orbiculatus literally means like orb shaped. The leaves of the non-native one are round or roundish.
Mhm.
orbiculate. The native one, the leaves are longer than they are wide. So that's a start in telling them apart. And I think I did mention in the presentation, the berries. They're in a real beautiful terminal clump on the native one. The oriental one, they kind of come out the axils along the sides, but they both are woody vines.
Okay, I'm asked, that was my question actually, because I had to eradicate non-native bittersweet in my backyard. And I'm looking for replacing it with a native. And I just was curious how that worked, and I need to look into that. Okay, next question. Okay, this is, well, first of all, someone asked, how do we access this presentation after the fact, the recording? And that is not a question for Andrew. And the question is, I believe, Sue, if you are here, can you answer it's going to be on, on the Facebook page. We're going to list that, and will it be on the website as well?
Well, yeah, once I get the, whoops here, hold on one moment. Yeah. Once I get this downloaded, it's going to be on Presque Isle Audubon's YouTube channel. So what I will do is once I get that done, it'll probably be done tomorrow or Sunday morning. I'll send out a link to everybody on MailChimp, and then I'll post it on our Facebook page, and then I can have Tony post it on our website. So just give me a couple of days, that's all.
Okay. And Maggie asked if she's interested in becoming an Audubon member. You just need to go to presqueisleaudubon.org and find the membership link. Okay, next question for Andrew. Is there a field guide to plants on Presque Isle? If not, you should do one.
Yes, I did. I was just looking at the chat and I saw that. You know, there is a bird checklist for Presque Isle in Erie County. Really, really well done, highly detailed checklist that a lot of great ornithologists and local nature enthusiasts have collaborated to put together and continually update. You could find it. I think it's the Erie Bird Observatory website has it. It's excellent. I think it would be neat if we could have something like that for flowers as well. And that's something I certainly would be open to doing. I think it'd be neat to have that in like the gift shop at the Tom Ridge Environmental Center. Maybe have it organized by season. And then within each season, like habitat, like what you'd find in the woods in the summer, what you'd find in the beaches in the spring, what you might find in the wetlands in the fall. So that's definitely something I think would be really cool. And I would like to do that at some point. If there's interest and there's the funding, I think that would be great.
And someone wants to know what your favorite plant is on Presque Isle.
Oh, wow.
That's like asking people, what is your favorite bird?
That's hard because I love them all so much. I guess if I can say one that really inspired me the most to get interested in this, I would say the lupine. I was in high school. I might have even been in middle school. This was years ago. And I walked the Dead Pond Trail. I hadn't even known that there were lupines in the park, or even what lupines were, or that I happened to be there at the perfect time. And I came out of those pines on the trail. It was like early June, we're late in the spring, and there's just this carpet of purple. And I just was like, wow, I feel like I'm in like this exotic fantasy world. It's just so beautiful. And it just really inspired me seeing all those. And then spending subsequent years just finding more and more cool stuff. And then later finding out there's nowhere else in the state that has so many rare plants in one area concentrated. And we have it right here in Erie. So, I mean, we're really blessed in what we have. I think a lot of people, we have like backyard syndrome. We're like, oh yeah, the peninsula, it's just a normal place, but it's not. It is like an exceptional place for birds, for plants, for so many different things. So yeah, I'd say lupine.
Okay. Let's see. Chris Lundberg wants to know, Andrew, have you ever explored in and around Yellow Bass Pond? This is the Erie Bird Observatory's marsh bird monitor. So he is very intimately familiar with the marsh areas of Presque Isle.
Yeah, that's an interesting area. I've never put on waders and gone back in there. I've never boated through there with a kayak either, but I know it's between Ridge Pond and between the Dead Pond, sand plain and ridge. I've walked up to the edge of it before and gazed out across it, but I never really explored it in depth. So I'd be curious to learn more about what's back in there. I know it's a more secluded area, so it's probably, I can see why it would be a great place for marsh birds because it's away from people.
And this is actually one of my questions. I was actually hoping to learn more about bladderwort, and you didn't talk about bladderwort. And it's one of my favorite things when I walk out to Gull Point every year when the bladderwort starts blooming. And it's in various different places in the ponds on the walk out to Gull Point and at Gull Point, depending on the water levels. And is that beneficial to wildlife in any way? I'm sure it is.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned bladderwort. I probably there's another 100 plants I would have liked to put in here, and I didn't know. I was thinking if I go on too long, or if I nerd out a little too much with this, I might overwhelm some people. So I couldn't include every plant. That was one unfortunately didn't include, but it is one of the coolest plants in the park.
Mm-hmm.
And you can find it at marshes as well, inland too, in the glaciated region of northwestern Pennsylvania. What's really cool about it, little bladders on the roots of this plant, and it grows in the water, truly aquatic plant. And the bladders actually, they actually like little tiny microorganisms get sucked into the bladder. So it is a carnivorous plant. And the flowers are very pretty, bright yellow, very interesting, intricate. And there's actually more than one kind too. I found another species of bladderwort this year while kayaking the lagoons. And the flowers are smaller, much smaller in fact. And the plants they bloom more densely. And I identified it as humped bladderwort, which is supposed to be less common than the regular ones. So there's at least a couple kinds on the park. And it's really a neat plant.
Okay. I know where they are, but I'm going to let you answer this. Where are the lupines?
Well, so as I mentioned before, if you take a stroll along the Dead Pond Trail, you can find them there. But if you do go there, I must tell everyone and caution everyone, please stay on the trail because walking off the trail, you don't want to end up trampling on the plants or disturbing birds or other animals that are in there. It's a very sensitive area. There's just nowhere else in Pennsylvania where you're going to find an oak savanna, sand barren system like this. But I will tell you, the Dead Pond Trail, east of the Bee Trail, as long as you stay on the trail, you will be delighted. They bloom Memorial Day into early June.
Yeah, they are particularly lovely in that one spot. If you are unfamiliar with how to find this place that he's talking about, if you go to Thompson Circle and you go into the trail that's there and take the right fork of that trail and head out, that sand plain, it exists on down that right hand leg, and it is I probably maybe halfway down the trail, towards the other end of it. I'm not exactly sure. I just know that it's one of the most beautiful places on the park. Okay, next question. Do bladderworts persist in the seed bank when things dry out? And a related, it says, I understand that bladderwort is invasive in some areas. So you can address both of those if you'd like.
Okay, so all of the bladderworts that I'm familiar with, they're all in the genus Utricularia. And as far as I know, all the ones I'm aware of are native. Maybe there's the non-native invasive one out there I haven't learned about, but as far as I know, they're all native. And as far as persisting in the seed bank, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on that. I'm not sure. It's possible. I'd have to consult the literature and look a little more deeply into that. It's possible. I don't know. It depends on the species. Some species can persist in the seed bank longer than others, so I'm not sure about that one.
Well, this is totally non-professional observation, anecdotal. From my years of walking out to Gold Point to watch birds, The there are areas where it's either dry or, shall we say, not wet, and then they become wet and bladderworts will occur. So, I mean, it's quite possible. I mean, that they're long ranging. I mean, I see areas shifting all the time, and things are dry and not producing anything, and then the water moves in and all these things come up, not just bladderwort, but all sorts of other plants. So it's quite possible that those things hang on, but I certainly am not a botanist. So
I would say it's very likely. It makes a lot of sense. I know there's a lot of seeds that will hang out in the seed bank, and then they'll come up after the water goes down too. So depending on the water level, things will germinate. And depending on the species, some things hang on in the seed bank pretty long. I do know also that some things hang on in the seed bank underneath the Phragmites stands. I know this from Dr. Bissell, personal communication, that removing the Phragmites and other invasive plants and getting that out of there, stuff in the seed bank, the native stuff will regenerate. So that the seed bank is one of our greatest allies in terms of conservation and at the peninsula, because luckily there's stuff hiding down in there that could come up once areas are restored.
Okay, I'm going to ask anybody who has any more questions, or if I've missed a question, there's a lot in this chat. If you know, throw your hand up now or send us a quick message, but I do not see any more questions for Andrew. And if you have them right now, now's the time.
Mary?
Yeah, I'll hang in there a couple more minutes if anybody wants to ask another question.
Hi, this is Sue, and I don't have a question, but I would like everyone to know that it's obvious Andrew has been botanizing for a while, and he's fairly new to birding. So if anybody wants to take him birding, he would love to go along with you. I think I'm correct in saying that, Andrew?
Yeah, I'm definitely much more amateurish with birds. I don't have as much in-depth knowledge or experience. So if anyone in the Audubon Society is looking for someone to join them as we move, especially as we move toward the warmer weather, I would love to go out and look for owls, warblers, shorebirds, anything. I'm excited to learn, and I'm trying to start a life list of birds now as well. So I would definitely love to go out and learn.
Well, and Andrew, you are always willing to accompany me to Gull Point. My season starts April 15th. And I do want to hear more about wild celery being a food source for plovers, because they typically don't eat plants, but we could discuss that, and I could investigate that more thoroughly.
Yeah, my understanding is like the piping plovers, they only eat insects and invertebrates, right?
Right.
That's what I thought. But I did find that there were some shorebirds that, according to one source, do eat wild celery. So it'd be interesting to see if there's ones that do and which ones don't.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Someone asked, do you live in Erie? Yes, he does.
Yeah, I live about a half hour, 40 minutes south of Erie, down in Crawford County.
Oh, okay. You actually live in Crawford.
Mm-hmm. Yep, but I work in Erie, so I'm up there all the time.
Okay. All right. Well, I don't see any other questions. Okay, I live in Crawford. You answered. Okay. Tell them about your garden.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So if anybody likes gardening or horticulture, I do have a place that in collaboration with my father, Milton, we have a place called Serenity Gardens, and it's a day trip drive from Erie. It's like 40 minutes, like I said, south of Erie. It's on US Route 19 between Sagertown and Cambridge Springs. And if you're interested, I did put my email at the beginning of the presentation here. I'll put it again in the chat so that you can see it in case you didn't get it. It's andrew.sipple@yahoo.com. Yeah, so send me an email if you're interested. We open up in the spring, and we have native perennials that we sell. We have tours of our gardens. We also have a rental cottage as well. People like to stay, and it's kind of like a little secluded place to enjoy nature. So Oh, we have a couple hiking trails as well too. We have a warbler trail and an old field trail. So, people are welcome. If they let us know they want to come out, they can go birding. We have old field shrubland habitats. It's a great place for a lot of songbirds. So yeah, just send me an email if you're interested.
And Andrew, before we depart, there's a lot of Alejandra, Ali, if you want to go birding in Crawford, let me know. I'd love to know more about plants. We can trade knowledge. So I would recommend, Ali, that you email Andrew and make that connection. I can't think of any other way to make sure that happens. And because the recording is not going to include the chat. So Ali, I don't know, when you said Facebook ? What does that mean?
Yeah, you can find me on Facebook as well. It's just under Andrew Sipple. My profile picture, you'll see me in a forest with a tree. And that's the Andrew Sipple you'll want. And then
Okay.
you can send me a message there as well.
Okay, she said, okay, thanks. So I think we have everybody covered. And if I have, hey, there's Gail Curtis waving. Hey, Gail. We can't hear you, Gail. You're muted. Is Gail?
Yeah, no, I'm not muted now. We live on the coast of Maine. Can you hear me?
Wow.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you for tuning in to learn about
You're
Lake
welcome,
Erie.
Andrew. Anytime you want to come and do a little exploration here on the coast of Maine, come and stay with us. We
Oh,
would
fantastic.
love to have you. We would love to host you and whomever you bring. So.
Yeah, it's actually on my bucket list to explore the New England coast because there's a lot of coastal plains.
Put us right on there. We live in Camden, rural Camden. And here's Ruby. Ruby, say welcome. Here's Ruby.
Hi there.
You can walk with her.
What a beautiful dog.
Australian Terror.
Wow. Beautiful.
Gail, how did you hear about this presentation?
Oh, the old man here next to me.
We've always wanted to go birding in Presque Isle Audubon, so Presque Isle, so sort of got linked in from looking at it last fall or spring.
Okay, super. That's great. Well, hello.
Now there this spring, but
Hello from Northwestern Pennsylvania.
We're actually planning a sibling bicycle trip on the Erie Canal.
Oh, nice. Which is in New York State, just in case you don't know that, but yeah.
Well, we did the Ohio. We did the what did we do last year? The C&O and the Allegheny. And
okay. Yeah. Yeah. Sue, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, so to both of you in Maine, feel free to send me an email. It would be great to connect.
Okay, I will do that, Andrew. And do you want me to show you your accommodations?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, just send me an email and we can be in contact.
Will do. We would love to have you. You're just amazing. And I love your hair.
Well, thank you. I need a haircut. I have not got it cut.
No, us older ladies are like, remembering when we had hair, and now, you have it. So celebrate it.
Thank you.
Sue, is there anything you want here? No, she said I'm good. Okay, super. Is there any other discussion that needs to occur? Sue, do you want to close this up?
Ouch.
Well, thank you, everybody, for attending. Andrew, that was just excellent. Again, if you need to contact him, you have his email. If anybody has any comments for me, I'm at president@presqueisleaudubon.org. And again, thanks for attending. If anybody wants to hang on and unmute and put their video on and chat with each other, I'm just going to leave the meeting open.